All right, let's dive in. We're heading into the darkness of an Egyptian prison. It's a place where people are sent to be forgotten, right? But for one man stuck in there, a gift he has, understanding dreams, is about to change everything. Not just for him, but for an entire nation.
So what we have here is a story of incredible highs and, well, devastating lows. You've got two men, two really strange dreams, and one guy who holds their entire future in his hands. The stakes? They honestly could not be higher.
Okay, so verse 1 kicks things off with two of Pharaoh's top guys, his chief butler and his chief baker. I mean, these men are at the absolute peak of their careers, but they make one mistake, one single offense against the king, and boom, they're sent plummeting from the palace right into a dungeon.
And then, in verse 2, we find out exactly why. It was Pharaoh's rage. You gotta understand, in ancient Egypt, the Pharaoh's word was law. His anger wasn't just a bad mood, it was a potential death sentence. In just a single moment, the entire world these two men knew was flipped upside down.
So in verse 3, it's official. Their fall from grace is complete. They're thrown into the prison run by the captain of the guard. And this is where fate, or something bigger, steps in. Because this is the exact same dungeon where our guy, Joseph, has been locked up for years for a crime he didn't commit. Their paths are about to cross in a way nobody could have seen coming.
This brings us to verse 4, and this is where you really see what Joseph is made of. Even though he's a prisoner too, his character is so solid that the warden trusts him to take care of these new, high-profile inmates. And what does Joseph do? He serves them. No bitterness, no why me, just straight-up compassion for these two fallen men.
All right, verse 5. This is where things get weird. On the very same night, both the butler and the baker have these super vivid, troubling dreams. And these aren't just, random pizza dreams. They feel important, like they mean something, and each dream tells a totally different story. Suddenly, the air in that dark cell is just thick with mystery. So the next morning rolls around. Verse 6 tells us Joseph comes in to check on them, but he does more than just bring them food. He actually looks at them. He sees their faces and immediately picks up on their distress. He can tell they're deeply sad about something.
And that leads us right into this pivotal moment in verse 7. Joseph doesn't just ignore it or walk away. He leans in with a simple human question. Why do you look so sad today? I mean, in a place that is totally devoid of hope, that small act of kindness is like a huge beacon of light.
So in verse 8, they spill the beans. They tell him they've had these intense dreams, but there's no one in prison to tell them what they mean. And Joseph's response is so telling. He doesn't puff out his chest and say, I can help. Nope, he points them straight to God, saying, don't interpretations belong to God? And only then does he humbly ask them to share.
Okay, so the butler decides to go first. In verse 9, he starts telling his story, painting this picture with his words. He says, in my dream, a vine just appeared right in front of me, right there in the dark prison cell. And then verse 10 gets even wilder. He describes these 3 branches on the vine that, like in the blink of an eye, go through their entire life cycle. They bud, they blossom, and then bam, they're loaded with ripe grapes. This impossible speed tells him this isn't just a dream, it's a message.
The dream hits its peak in verse 11. The butler finds himself doing his old job again. He's taking those grapes, squeezing them into Pharaoh's personal cup, and handing it to the king. He's back where he belongs. And then the dream ends, leaving him with one burning question. What on earth does it mean?
And Joseph doesn't even skip a beat. Verse 12, he just lays it out plain and simple. The 3 branches, he says, are 3 days. The countdown has officially begun.
And that brings us to verse 13, which is just incredible news for the butler. Joseph predicts that in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head, which is just an old way of saying he'll honor you and give you your old job back. Freedom is literally just 3 days away.
But right after giving him this amazing, life-changing news, Joseph gets really vulnerable in verse 14. He makes this desperate plea. He says, but when things are going well for you, please remember me. He's begging him, tell Pharaoh about me. Get me out of this place. And in verse 15, you can just feel the pain behind his words. He lays out the raw injustice of it all. I was kidnapped from my home, and I've done nothing here to deserve this. He is an innocent man just crying out for a little bit of justice.
Now the baker sees all this, right? And in verse 16, his hopes are soaring. He's thinking, hey, my turn. This is great news.
He eagerly jumps in to tell his own dream, totally expecting a similar happy ending.
But the baker's dream, oof, verse 17 describes it, and it has a totally different vibe. He sees 3 baskets of fancy bread on his head, all for Pharaoh. But then, these birds just swoop down and start eating the bread right out of the top basket. It's a really chilling image.
You can just imagine Joseph's face falling as he hears this. In verse 18, he starts the interpretation the same exact way. The 3 baskets represent 3 days, but this time the tone is heavy. All that hope that was in the cell just moments before, it's gone.
And then, verse 19, this is where the hammer drops. Joseph says that in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head from you, a horrifying twist on the same phrase he used for the butler, and hang your body on a tree for the birds to eat. It's a sentence for a brutal public execution.
So verse 20 brings us to the day of reckoning. 3 days have passed, exactly like Joseph said. It's Pharaoh's birthday, so there's this huge party going on. But for 2 men, it's Judgment Day.
And sure enough, verses 21 and 22 lay it all out, confirming Joseph's interpretations with chilling accuracy. Pharaoh restores the chief butler to his job, lifting his head in honor. But he hangs the chief baker, literally lifting his head off of him in execution. 2 men, 2 dreams, 2 completely opposite fates.
But the story isn't over, and verse 23 is just a gut punch. The chief butler, now back in his fancy clothes, living his life of luxury, doesn't remember Joseph. He just forgets the man who gave him his future back, and Joseph is just left there, alone in the dark.
So after all that, after being a source of hope, after holding the key to another man's freedom, he's just abandoned, forgotten, and it leaves us with this really heavy question to think about. What does it feel like to be the one left behind?